All right, good morning, everybody. It's 8:32. We tried to give an extra minute because I see a lot of folks logging in. I know it's our first webinar in a while, so we want to give technology a chance to work for everybody here. But good morning and thanks for attending. It's been a little while since we've done a webinar series like this, but our goal here as vendors who serve the community association is just to give everybody a platform where we can talk about what we think are interesting topics, pertinent topics to associations, and give you all a platform to ask your questions. We'll talk about how to do that in a moment here. And in just a moment, I'll introduce you to a couple of our, what I think are fantastic panelists, who a few of you probably know from around town. So my name is Jeff Sanders. I'm a commercial insurance client advisor with Acrisure Gulfshore Insurance. We work with about 900 associations in Southwest Florida. So it's a big part of what we do is not only helping them procure insurance, but participating in groups like this. But we're not going to talk much about insurance today. I'm really here as your MC or your host, if you will. I'm going to monitor the chat situation here and try and get some questions over to our two fantastic panelists. So without further ado, why don't I give each of our panelists a chance to introduce themselves and say hello. And after you guys do that, I'm going to go through the chat feature and make sure everybody knows how to answer their questions or ask their questions. And then we'll take it from there. Kyla, why don't I start with you? Say hello to everybody.
Hi, everybody. How are you all doing today? My name is Kyla Thompson. I'm an attorney at Varnum, and I practice community association law 100% of the time, and I'm happy to be here.
All right. Thank you, Kyla. Everyone loves the free legal advice. And I don't know if anybody caught it, but Kyla is now with Varnum. That's a change. So congratulations on the change to Varnum. You're a partner over there. Just want to make sure everybody knows where you are these days. So
Thank you.
it's great
Yes.
to see you. Frank, how are you this morning?
Excellent, Jeff and Kyla. It's an honor to be with you. As a panelist here today. My name is Frank Valdes. I'm the regional director with GetQuorum. I serve the great state of Florida, housed and located in Florida here, and we provide electronic voting for communities. So super excited to obviously dive into some of these wonderful subject matters today. And I expect nothing less than a really good remix from Jeff by the end of this session, since he is the MC and the DJ, right? Make sure we get some 90s in there, Jeff, 2000s, and today, right? Let's just not go to one section.
Hey, be careful what you ask for. My wife hates my music taste, but I might give you a little playlist by the end of this thing.
All right, make sure you got some Taylor Swift in there, because these days you can't get away without having that.
Hey, she's the queen now, isn't she? That's good. I love it. Well, this is great, guys. Thanks everyone for attending. Frank, I've seen you speak before. This is what I think is a really interesting topic. I mean, really, it's just sort of the future of associations here. Everything we do, just like this webinar, right? We're doing it virtually or electronically. Look, it's easy for people. It gives other people that maybe aren't in town or they're not that involved with their association to attend, to participate. You can do it on your cell phone, your computer. So I think this is a great presentation. It certainly is something where we can use technology to streamline the process for some things that are really, really timely or really, really time intensive. Kyla and I were talking before we came on air here, and she was talking about one of her associations who has 1,600 doors, and you're there till 10 o'clock at night. I mean, that's not an efficient process for anybody. So I'm interested to hear you, Frank, and hear your opinions as well, Kyla. Just before we kick off, I want to make sure everybody takes a moment just to identify where the chat feature is on your screen, folks. These presentations go a heck of a lot more smoothly, and they're a lot more interesting when we can hear from you, whether they're questions or comments about what you're doing at your association. Take a moment to identify that chat feature. Unfortunately, with this webinar, we can't take you off of mute. You'll have to type it in. I'm going to be sort of the MC, the host, monitoring that. I'll pitch the questions over to the panelists in case they don't see them. So from there, Frank, I'm going to let you take it over. I'll stop sharing my screen. I'll let you share your slides, and it's your show from here on out.
Wonderful. Thank you again, Jeff. And super excited to be here, obviously, with Kyla and presenting this electronic voting presentation today to the audience. So audience, do me a favor, if you have not yet, get yourself a good cup of coffee, all right, here. And I'd say popcorn, but it's a little early for that. So just get ready for the show here. It should be good. And yes, we love participation. We love obviously a conversational approach to these meetings. We can certainly hurry up the presentation if we get a ton of questions a little bit, and then of course slow it down if we don't get too much. So let's get everybody as we go through these kind of layers of the presentation to make sure you chime in. Super excited. So I'll share my screen here and see if everybody hopefully can see it, see the technology is cooperating with us this morning. And hopefully it is.
Looks
All
good on
right.
my end, Frank.
Great. Same here. I'm seeing some thumbs up. So for all of our licensed CAMs today, make sure if you haven't already that you get your CAM license number over to Jeff. If you haven't, again, already done that, because you will receive a 1 credit hour for a continuing education course, CRS 8720, titled, right, Electronic Voting and Virtual Meetings for Florida Condominiums and HOAs. I
Yes.
apologize if you logged in and you think you're here for the service animals friend or foe presentation, that you're in the wrong space. I believe that might be later on today with another provider. But today, right now, what we're discussing here is electronic voting, right? A much less controversial, hopefully, subject than service animals these days, as I see the signs popping up in Publixes and all other sort of markets everywhere else. So electronic voting, we're going to go through that, dive into that presentation. A little bit about my background, right? As I mentioned earlier, regional director for GetQuorum, coming up on 2 years here with them. Extremely excited for the opportunity I receive and I continue to have with these associations. I do live in the kind of West Broward, Fort Lauderdale area myself in the state of Florida. I do have a state license to teach the DBPR continuing education course that you will have today, and work with the local CAI chapters and national as well. Board member of a 450 unit HOA because my neighbor decided I wasn't busy enough and he put my name in the hat. Yeah, could you believe that? Just I wasn't busy enough to put my name in the hat, and here I am sitting on my own board of directors in an HOA. So I'll get an insider's perspective into a lot of these issues that come up. And prior to that, chair of the ACC and the violations committees in my association. Prior to this, worked in the property management industry. So all in all, to say that hopefully I hope to be really a resource to all of you on the call today, right? A subject matter expert, if you will, somebody that you can lean on and rely on, along with Kyla here, and say, hey, got questions about this subject. I know who to call and who we can start these conversations up with, right? I'll pause there. I'll give Kyla, if you'd like, a little bit of a minute here to get into your background, just to make sure before I even dive into the presentation.
Thanks so much, Frank. And I'm very excited to be here today with Jeff and you as well, Frank. And I know that you are the expert in online voting and electronic voting and getting stuff together and helping these communities. So I'm happy to be here today. So as I said earlier, my name is Kyla Thompson. I'm an attorney and a partner at Barnum. And I practice community association law, condos, HOAs, co-ops 100% of the time. And I find a lot of enjoyment from the relationships that I make, not only with fellow vendors like Jeff and Frank on this webinar, but also all of my board members and all of the owners that I meet. I always laugh because there's not one day that is the same for me. One day we're writing violation letters, the next day I'm negotiating contracts, the next day we're talking about online voting. So it's fun, and I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. All right. We've got an agenda, folks. We're going to keep it organized, all right, this morning, and we are going to push through these introductions that we just got through, make sure that we get a good understanding of a few factors that are involved with electronic voting, right? We're going to make sure that we can take a look at the governance meetings today. Generally speaking, some are still happening in person, and then, of course, we've got some hybrid approaches out there. Most importantly, in my opinion, out of this presentation, if you take nothing else, as they say, away from it, make sure that you have a good understanding of the Florida statutes governing the electronic voting for our associations. Good news, we've got an expert here, all right? As a panelist, Kyla will make sure that we do not walk away without having the facts and understanding what really the first steps are from an association perspective, from a CAM. If you're on this call today, having a good foundation as to, hey, board of directors, this is where the process starts. It's usually not with calling Frank or GetQuorum or an electronic voting provider, shockingly enough, right? Those are great conversations. We love to have those, but more than likely we'll be directing you back to ensuring that you are consistent and compliant with all the Florida statutes. So we'll walk through those today, all right? You'll walk out of here hopefully with a good understanding of where that begins. In terms of virtual meetings, we'll take a dive into virtual meetings. Yes, everybody's familiar with Zoom or Cisco WebEx like we're using this morning, even some of the Microsoft Teams. But we're going to take a little bit of a deeper dive as to how those platforms can help you in your annual meetings as an association, right? And your monthly board meetings, and really how to leverage that technology a little bit more specifically, more granularly, and tailored to your needs, right? We'll walk through challenges, right? Because with everything else that's different, or as you change processes in your association, there's certainly some challenges to consider, especially out there for the associations that might be self-managed, might be trying to do a lot of these things on their own, right? We'll walk through what some of those look like to make sure that you're on the lookout for them ahead of time. And we'll make sure we kind of wrap it up with some of the best practices and what the future holds, right? We're going to predict a little bit based on the information that we already have from the last 8 years that this has existed as to what we're expecting in 2024 and beyond. And we'll make sure that we leave plenty of time for Q&A. More than likely, we'll pause in some phases of the presentation for some Q&A. I kind of hate to have everyone completely hold it off to the end, but I will give you some sort of a heads up. If it gets too long-winded with questions, Jeff will kind of give me the nod like, hey, we've got to move the presentation forward, because I got to make sure I give everybody credit, right, for the continuing education portion of this. So that's the agenda. If everybody's hopefully has their coffee by now, as I gave that fair warning at the beginning, let's dive right in. All right. A little bit about GetQuorum. I spoke about my background. Obviously, Kyla got an opportunity to speak to hers, but a little bit about GetQuorum and who I work for, what we do. So GetQuorum is an industry-leading provider of, yes, folks, electronic voting, right, ballots, proxies. But they didn't stop there. They said, we've got to assist communities with items like electronic meeting distribution services, a huge player right now in the association space, as owners forego what would be a normal, regular paper mailing for annual meetings, right, for budgets and other special meetings. They're opting into electronic notices, governance-related notices specifically, not just we're pressure washing the sidewalks in the community. We'll dive into that, right? And of course, virtual meetings as well. So GetQuorum does provide hosted virtual meetings, annual and special meetings. So ultimately, over 2,000 communities since 2015 now served, 30 plus industry experts, and a Zoom ISV provider, proud member of CAI. All right, let's dive right into this. Here we go. Governance meetings today. All right, what do they look like? Well, certainly we've got a lot of associations out there, especially in Florida, still pushing forward with mostly, if not all, an in-person meeting, right? Fully in person, no virtual component, no electronic voting component. And here are some of those shortcomings in those meetings. And we experienced them, of course, not only through COVID, but I think it opened up our eyes. And I know myself as a board member and obviously as an owner in an association as to what some of the downfalls are and the challenges in these fully only in-person meetings. And here they are. Look, depending on the size of your community, right, whether it's 100 units or in our world, we've got over 5,000 unit communities, they can be challenging. You've got a lot of heavy costs on the front end, printing, mailing notices, meeting materials. You've got on the efficiency side, a lot of manual tracking, accessibility. It more than likely would be inaccessible for anyone that's unable to attend the in-meeting persons, right? So keep that in mind. Sometimes for some board members, they feel like that's a good thing, right? The lack of participation. But I promise you, and I'm sure Kyla will shake her head here, as you try to amend your governing docs, you will certainly go, we need the participation, right? We want everyone here to help out, right? So we'll walk through obviously some options there. Look, there's a massive delay, as we know, with things like making sure everything's in person, or it is, we call snail mail, unfortunately, these days on the compliance side, making sure all those regulations, bylaws, and specific processes are followed for the in-person meeting. And from the safety perspective, I think the pandemic opened up all of our eyes into, hey, maybe 400 people in a room for an annual meeting isn't necessarily the best way to approach things. And by the way, we've got associations that we serve. As Jeff mentioned earlier, he said 1,000, 2,000 unit associations. I kind of try to get some votes counted for till 10 o'clock in the morning. Well, I certainly have a better case where it was 2 in the morning, right, for a 3,000 unit association over in the west coast of Florida. From a safety perspective, I can't imagine trying to allow even access for over 2,000 unit owners. By the way, if the unit owners have some sort of significant other, other person that is on the deed, right, they also have a right to attend these meetings. You could potentially have 4,000 to 5,000 unit owners trying to attend at least a meeting, unless you have some sort of license to rent out an arena or a stadium somewhere. More than likely, it's not happening, right? So while that could be challenging, we'll certainly dive into, from a safety perspective, what that looks like and some of the options. Kyla, you got anything to add here?
Yes, in terms of delay and getting compliance when it comes to the 14-day notice, I had a situation in the height of COVID where it was no longer in the emergency part of COVID. We were just kind of living and doing a lot of things virtually. And I had an association that wanted to do an election. It was time for them to do an election. And the management company sent out all of the notices. And for some reason, a lot of owners did not get their mail. They just didn't get the mail. But I had enough for a condo association. You must have, if you have at least 20% of the people vote, then you can hold your election even if you don't get a quorum for your annual meeting. And so I had enough people hit that 20% to where there was an election, although a bulk of the population, more than a majority of the owners, didn't even get the mail. And so there's a lot to be said, not only about electronic voting, but also the thought of electronic notice. Rather than sending things out in snail mail, now you can get it by email. And then once you get it by email, you click that link, it goes to the website for your electronic voting, and you vote right there and you're done.
Absolutely. And I promise you, based on TV shows that I've seen, that mail will pop up in about 5 to 10 years in a garage somewhere much after that postal carrier has retired, right? And it'll say, it just had a bad week. This is a true story, folks. Look it up. It's ended up in garages somewhere. So hopefully that's not the case here. There was something more behind that. But certainly there's absolutely some options here. So good news, folks, right? We're going to make sure this presentation today isn't too down and dreary. Technology is trending. There are options out there, as Kyla just mentioned, right? A number of condos and HOAs, based on some of the CAI statistics that we have pulled, is increasing year over year. And they're leveraging governance-related technology, not only for electronic, obviously, notices, but also for electronic voting as well. So here's where we stand in the state of Florida. Over 32% of the communities now have documentation, right? And we'll dive into what that looks like, that documentation, permitting the use of electronic voting for the board of directors elections, for special meetings, and many of those as well have electronic notices also. Legislation, folks, was adopted in 2015. Shocker, right? This is a moment of the presentation where people go, wait a minute, if I do my math correctly, that's much before COVID. Yes, folks, in 2015, the statutes changed. They allowed electronic voting in the state of Florida. What do? Because we're a sleepy, usually half snowbird type of state, we pushed it to the side and we said one day, right, in the future, our great grandkids will probably use electronic voting. And certainly, we don't need that, right? As COVID came into play here, I think we all said, how can we continue to do our governance related meetings, right? How can we get votes done without having a mass populace of people in a room? So what do? We certainly leverage the technology and those statutes. Thank goodness that the legislation changed or allowed to pass in 2015. So another bit of good news as we kind of dive into some of the statutory requirements here. Participation rate jumps, folks, from 20% on average throughout our 2,000 communities like GetQuorum services that we've seen have no electronic voting, electronic notices out there, to 80% on average with electronic voting. This is huge. This is massive amounts of participation. Why? Because we're finally communicating with most, right? The 80% is the most of the owners, how they're used to communicating, right? Most of us have the smartphones. We certainly are overusing Amazon these days, right? Way too much. Got to compile that down like myself, but certainly, generally speaking, we're used to that format. We're used to that communication style. And what's happened? We finally are catching up some of these association procedures to communicate with folks how they're used to communicating in their everyday lives, instead of forcing some sort of notice in a mailbox where we're used to receiving junk mail, or even worse, a bill, right? They're still coming in the mailbox for us. So 80% participation rates. We'll dive into that 80% in a little bit more in the presentation. Why? That's significant. Most of these associations have high thresholds for amendment requirements and material alteration votes that do require that 66 and 2/3 or 70%. And generally speaking, and based on the data here, you could not get those things done if you're not using or leveraging an electronic voting option, right? So I'll leave it there, and we will dive here into the meat and potatoes, the heart of the presentation, which is really to make sure that we have a good understanding of the statutes, right? Look, folks, this is where it starts, at least for GetQuorum as a provider and for most electronic voting providers in the state of Florida. If you aren't having a conversation as you're engaging with these companies about the statutory requirements for your community, you're doing something wrong, right? Why? Because there are Florida statutes that govern the use of electronic voting, and they're very specific. And good news, whether you're 718 tuning in today, or our 719s are co-ops, or 720s HOAs, they're pretty standardized across the board. And obviously, I'm going to give Kyla just a moment, kind of a little bit of time to speak to it, but they're pretty standardized. Unlike most of the other Florida statutes that get all over the place, depending on what you are, these are pretty standardized, statutes, and they do dive into subjects such as making sure the board passes a resolution. So I'll give the mic here kind of over to Kyla and make sure that we walk through the statutory requirements, folks, as it pertains specifically to the state of Florida, right? And what boards have to make sure it's taken care of before you can engage or use electronic voting for your community. Take it away, Kyla.
All right, thanks, Frank. There was a comment a little bit earlier when you were talking about the electronic notice and getting all of the notices by email. Comment from Chip said, we end up getting much of our electronic notices going to people's spam or junk folders, and they never knew that they got it. And that is not an uncommon thing that happens in a lot of these associations. And when that problem arises, I always end up saying communication is key. You need to make sure you're telling these owners all of the mailings went out, either paper mailings or email mailings. If you consented to receive electronic notices, so email mailings, know that they have been sent out, and they have been sent out from this email address. If you're not getting it, and you should have gotten it yesterday or the day before, check your junk folder, because it will be in there. And if you don't have it there, let me know, and we will send you that notice specifically to you. Because sometimes, we all are human. We have errors, and there's lots of email addresses that might be a little bit different, and the L ends up being a 1 or the 1 being an L. And so if you're not there and you're not getting all of the information, communication from both sides is key. And I just wanted to make that point because it happens quite a lot. And as we go through December and start ramping up into election season, and that's when everybody gets a little bit crazy and wanting to make sure that all the notices are received. It's all about, from the association side, communicating so much to make sure that the owners don't feel like they are being singled out and they're not able to participate in their community.
I love the advice, and I'll add something very quickly and turn it back over to you so we can cover the statutory requirements, Kyla. But generally speaking, I know that the process as we follow as an electronic voting provider to these associations is, hey, could you please send out a mass communication email to your owners, letting them know that this is the week that they will be receiving their official annual meeting notice electronically in their inboxes. And if for some reason they did not receive it, to contact management office or the electronic voting provider right away, right? So there's always a mass communication email heads up, to your point, Kyla, to these owners ahead of time to let them know this is the week you should be receiving your communication. And it is coming from, for example, GetQuorum or whoever your provider is. In addition to that, through the process of opting into electronic notices in these communities, there should have been some sort of confirmation from the provider that's going to send out the electronic notices to match up what they're going to send to these owners, right? So there should have been some sort of confirmation email sent to them saying, hey, is this you? We're just confirming that we've got your authority to send out electronic communications moving forward. And if at that point everything was working and it wasn't going into spam, then moving forward, usually it is going to work correctly. So there are a few steps to take before the official annual meeting notice. The first or the second one go out. I couldn't agree with you more. And then those notices should be going out with the public. Look, put a sign up front of the community, let them know this is the week you should be receiving it, but communication is key. So I do appreciate that. And with that being said, we'll dive into kind of the statutory requirements here. Take it away, Kyla.
Yes. Okay. First things first, board resolution. You must, as a board, pass a resolution at a board meeting, and this is a special board meeting. We'll talk about what that means in a second. But a resolution actually has to be passed at a board meeting to implement electronic voting. So what does that mean? It's a special board meeting, meaning that it requires more than a 48-hour notice. It actually requires a 14-day notice. And most of the owners and most of my board members will say, well, why is it so special? Why is it more than 48 hours? I can't tell you why, other than that's what the statute requires. And the statute says if you're going to implement electronic voting, you must post your notice implementing the notice of the board meeting saying that you're going to implement electronic voting at least 14 days prior to the date of your board meeting. And you must also mail it out to your owners or hand deliver it or send it electronically by email only to those owners who consent to receive electronic notice. Okay, so not only do you have to post it at least 14 days ahead of time, you must take the extra step to mail or hand deliver or email to those owners who have consented. So it's a much higher threshold, and there must be a board resolution to approve this. So it's a little bit special, but it's special because it's going to help the association going forward with your election and your membership votes. So it lets everybody know. One of the biggest things is just because point number two, just because you implement electronic voting does not mean you must or you're able to require everyone to use electronic voting. That's just not how it works, folks, because some people do not want to use email. Some people don't want to go on the internet. They still like their paper ballots. They still like their paper mail. They like to open that mailbox and receive something in their hands, and that's okay. So electronic voting, if you want to implement electronic voting, and if you're an owner and you want to use it, you have to physically, in writing, consent to use it. Now, what does that mean in writing? And Frank, I'll bring you in here because I've got some associations, and I've certainly drafted it for associations to where I draft a paper consent. And that's sent out to everyone, and they sign, and they usually put their email address in there, and they say, I consent to electronic voting. But I do know that there's a way, if the owner is able to or wants to, that they can consent to electronic voting on the actual website.
Sure. So thank you for thinking of that specific step, right? So folks, think of it as a DocuSign, right? Many years ago, we've got things such as a DocuSign created, and they said, hey, as long as we can capture a digital signature and authenticate that you are in fact this person, that's as good as you physically signing something, right? An agreement, a contract, whatever it is. That is the sort of technology that electronic voting providers are using. Hopefully, you're connecting with a provider coming out of this session today that is assisting you to electronically capture a consent and an owner specifically opting into electronic voting by way of authenticating that owner and then having them provide an electronic signature. The electronic signature statutes in the state of Florida state that, hey, an electronic signature, so long as that owner is confirmed and identified, is as good as a wet signature, right? So those are the sort of statutes that we lean on to allow us to send out an electronic opt-in form for owners. I promise you, you will get a lot more participation if you allow owners to opt into electronic voting by way of an electronic means versus having them put something back in an envelope after signing it, put a stamp on it, and sending it back to management office or to an electronic voting provider. Typically, the participation is very low. So I certainly would encourage you to reach out to your electronic voting provider of choice and make sure that they are able to assist you with an electronic opt-in or consent form for these owners to do it in that sense.
And something else that I want to bring up is there's a difference between electronic voting and electronic notice. And both of them require consent. Both of them require the owner to physically say, yes, I want to be part of this. Electronic voting is the ability to vote online. Electronic notice is the ability to receive those official notices from the association via email. And so if you've only consented to electronic voting, the association is still required to send you physical snail mail in the mail for these envelopes to say, okay, now you can vote online, but we still have to send you all this stuff by mail. And so what I'd like to do, and I know Frank has done as well, is we combine them. Now, to consent into electronic voting will not require the 14-day notice, but when I draft these resolutions for the board, not only do I talk about implementing electronic voting, but also drafting something in there that says, and we also want to provide the opportunity for owners to consent to electronic notice, because then we save those printing costs, the paper costs, and the mailing costs, because then we just end up sending you an email. And then from that email, there's a link to go onto the website to vote electronically. So both of them go hand in hand, but they are different. So important to talk about that.
Kyla, thank you for mentioning that, because I see the question or the comment there from Chip, and I think maybe that's where you got that point. Because yeah, for a lot of these associations, they're timeshares, or maybe they just have a true snowbird population, so it can be very difficult to get them that notice. So that's an interesting process to sign up for the electronic notifications.
Yes, and I know a lot of associations, even though they're not required to, they send notices by email anyway as a courtesy. But if you don't sign up for your email notices, then you're never going to get those emails. But I do know a lot of associations will send courtesy notices, which is very nice, or they have a website. Depending on how large you are as a condo association, you're required to have a website. Even the smaller condo and HOAs and co-ops and timeshares, may not be required to have a website, but they put it on the website anyway, so that we just provide, again, communication is key, provide all the information that we can so that everybody who wants to participate is able to.
So it sounds like, at least initially in that transition, it's really kind of several different channels that you're trying to communicate through, but hopefully you can convert people to that electronic. Maybe by the end of year one, you're at 80% and things are really streamlined for year two. There's another question in the chat asking, can you have electronic consent only? Do you need a resolution for this? So I guess that would be sort of eliminating all paper notice, paper voting, I suppose. Maybe I'll let you run with that, Kyla.
Yeah, so electronic consent only, do you mean in terms of notice, or do you mean in terms of voting? I'm not really sure. I think you can, electronic notice only. You must consent to it as an owner. So I don't think you can require, and I know you can't require an owner to just so we, as an association, will say, okay, now we just want to send everything by email. I don't think you are allowed to do that, because the statute requires the owner to consent to electronic notice. Again, some people don't want to receive stuff by email, and so they will want to receive stuff by snail mail.
And
So you'd have to have
shockingly,
100% of people buy in, and then you could do it, I suppose.
correct.
Exactly. Yeah, that would be great. I haven't seen that though.
Yeah, no, and great points first and foremost, right? Great conversational kind of pause here in the presentation, because it is helping us get understanding of what these different requirements are and what the options are for a community. To Kyla's point and Jeff's point, electronic notices or electronic consents are different than electronic voting opt-ins, right? Yes, an association does have to get an order to consent to opting into electronic governance related notices for the community specifically. No, you cannot force owners to opt into electronic notices. I've had that question pop up a lot in my presentations, where associations go, this is great, we want it, we want to save 100% of our printing and postage costs moving forward, we're opting everyone into electronic notices. You can't do that, right? Why? Shockingly enough, folks, there are still owners out there that do not have an email address. I know, shocking, part of the demo today or the presentation, but yes, there are folks that do not have an email address, do not have a way to communicate by electronic means. And so I think the statutes fairly position themselves saying, hey, we cannot force any owners to opt into electronic voting or electronic notices. Instead, let's have a procedural kind of process here to allow owners to opt in and consent to opting into electronic notices or electronic voting. As by way of kind of an add-on to this part of the presentation, as an association, make sure you keep these records, please. We've got owners that many years later will forget that they opted into electronic voting or electronic consent for e-notices, and they'll come back and say, never did that. I have no idea what you're talking about. Make sure you've got a copy of their consent agreement so that you can present it to that owner later on if it comes into contention, right, Kyla?
Yes, that's absolutely right. And I get that part of the conversation of why did you send it to me? I never provided notice, and then I have to turn around to the association to say, well, did they? Yeah.
Right. Show the proof, right? I look, as an electronic voting provider, connect with a provider that will document this for you, keep these records for you in some sort of cloud, right? Or drive somewhere, and allow an association to download these basically and access these files on a whim, right? So make sure that you're connecting with that. So just to recap kind of what we covered here, want to make sure that everybody's on the same page with us at this part of the presentation. As an association, whether you're a co-op, right, whether you're 718, 719, 720s, the statutes are very clear. The first step in electronic voting is to make sure that as a board of directors that you have a notice, a 14-day notice, that you notice a meeting, a board meeting, whereby resolution is going to be voted on to allow electronic voting in your community. That is really just an on switch, folks, and it does not require a membership vote. Number one, making sure everybody's on the same page here. It's a board vote only. Number two, it does not require an amendment change. I've got that question a lot. Hey, hold on, are we amending the docs to allow electronic voting? You are not. The resolution will bypass kind of an amendment, if you will, here in layman's terms. So that resolution voted on by the board of directors, simple majority vote, will pass that resolution. Make sure you've got documentation reflecting that a resolution was voted on, reflecting that it was passed, and some sort of signed resolution. Again, document these cases, right? Because years later, there might be an owner asking, where is a copy of the resolution allowing electronic voting in our community? You've got to present these documents, right? It is record of the association. So we walk through that. Go ahead, Kyla.
The good thing also, Frank, is most of our documents are now in electronic format. So it's not like it's going to be taking up space in a drawer somewhere. And if it is, please scan them and put them on the cloud or put them on a jump drive or something to where a lot of these documents are now in an electronic format. Your point to regarding the amendment to the documents, I actually have that on the inverse. I get a lot of associations asking to amend their bylaws to literally write in electronic voting. And I say, I'm happy to do that, just so it establishes that you're allowed to do that, and that will require a membership vote, but you still can't do it without the resolution. Yeah. So if you want to do it, let's just do it all in one fell swoop. We'll do a membership vote and we'll do a resolution, or let's just do a resolution, implement electronic voting, and then you can do your membership vote, amending your bylaws by electronic voting.
Yeah, nice. And remember, the state was very fair in 2015 when they put this process in place, because they decided if we waited for every association to only be able to opt into electronic voting by amending their docs, right? Many associations will never use electronic voting because the threshold requirements to amend your docs is so high, they don't have the participation numbers. So it was very intentional when the statutes passed and they said, hey, simple board resolution will take care of this for you guys. You don't have to go out and ask the membership to vote on allowing electronic voting. Where they gave the power back to the members, just to be clear, folks, which is really step 2, again, in this slide to make sure we recap it, is then they said, owners, you have the option to opt in, right? By no means are you going to be forced to opt in to electronic voting, electronic notices. The board has the duty to opt or pass a resolution, but then the owners will get the opportunity for their say and to opt in to electronic voting or not. Folks, by doing absolutely nothing as an owner after a resolution has been passed and electronic voting is available, you default to what you have today: paper notices and paper voting. So I'll say that again for those in the call. For the owners that take absolutely no action after a resolution has been passed, they will stay exactly where they are. If they come banging on the association office saying, can't believe you guys passed the electronic voting resolution, I'm not going to vote electronically, you say, you're right, you just do not have to opt into it, and you'll stay with your paper notices and paper voting moving forward. So we're clear, that's the step. Find a provider that assists you in getting owners to opt into electronic voting. If you do it electronically or digitally, it's going to go a lot smoother than trying to send out only paper notice option to owners, allowing them to then sign it and opt back in. It's an arduous process. You'll get low participation, and that really just kind of recaps what we're specifically covering here. I will certainly pause and make sure that we've covered any questions that might be coming in, especially for Kyla at this point, in regards to the statutory requirements for our associations out there. We got anything, Jeff?
Looks good to me, guys. And I'll just give a gentle reminder. We're a little past the halfway point. This is awesome conversation. And I think this is where the gold is found. But I know we've got a good bit more material. So that's just a gentle reminder.
Okay.
Let's do it.
If we finish this slide, oh, that's all right.
Go for it.
It's just, you know, your
Go.
just wanting to make sure that the only things you can vote on for electronic voting are the things that are placed on the agenda and the things that are noticed to the owners. So you cannot vote on electronic voting on a random motion that's made, a substantive motion that's made at the meeting, because by that time it's already voted on and most of the owners have already voted. So that's why it's limited to the things that are presented in the agenda prior to, so that notice you receive at least 14 days prior to the date of your meeting.
Good stuff. All right. Hopefully spending a good amount of time. I know we certainly went over for this slide, but really this is the base. This is the foundation for all these associations, folks. So make sure you get a good understanding and connect with your association counsel specifically for that first step. All right, electronic voting. Look, at this point, and kind of, I feel like most of the communities say, hey, I know it's just voting electronically. There are a few options when it comes to electronic voting, so let's make sure we cover those, right? There are advanced electronic ballots that can be sent out there, right? So certainly in the general, obviously electronic voting is an owner using a digital means to vote electronically and cast a vote. However, is a ballot going to be sent out in advance of that meeting? Our 718s, a lot of those, and our 720s these days, we're seeing, especially the newer communities by the developers, they're using kind of more of an advanced ballot with no nominations from the floor. Make sure your electronic voting provider can cover those needs for your specific community. Proxies. We've got a lot of electronic proxies still out there being used, especially for the limited ones for amendment changes, for things like material alteration votes in our condos, right? Again, connect with an electronic voting provider and make sure that you give them a keen understanding of your specific community's needs, your procedures, what you do, you know, for in order to get these governance-related items passed, and then that they can turn around and say, absolutely, we can digitize this process for you. Real-time vote. Here's going to be kind of a shocker for most in the conversation today. We still have HOAs out there, mostly HOAs, that require voting only on the day of or a general proxy to be submitted. They are not sending any ballots in advance of the annual meeting, right? You either show up to the annual meeting, you cast your vote there as an owner, or you sign a general proxy, give your vote over to someone else, and they will vote. Many of those take nominations from the floor, right? So that's exactly why they are only allowing voting on the day of, because if they take nominations from the floor and they're also sending a ballot out in advance, it's obviously going to conflict with each other, right? So they say no advance ballots, only voting the day of, after we've made sure we've got no nominations from the floor and it's a fair process for everyone. If that is your situation, if you're in an HOA or some other sort of association that requires that sort of procedural vote, make sure that you're connecting with a provider, an electronic voting provider that can assist you with that process. The technology exists, folks. It's called Zoom webinar integration with electronic voting where owners, just like ourselves, log into a meeting by a specific link. They're given a ballot in front of their screens. There's usually a moderator from the electronic voting company on the call, modifying the ballot real time if there are any nominations from the floor, modifying the ballot real time, and then getting it in front of the owners that have logged in electronically or virtually, getting it in front of them in their screens virtually so that they can vote. Of course, for the owners that are present, that have gone to the in-person meeting, their process pretty much stays the same. It's usually some sort of paper, ballot with any nominations from the floor, right, and write-ins. So that process kind of stays the same, but digitally or virtually, there are options for those communities out there. The technology does exist. I just want to cover that. Got anything on this slide, Kyla?
No, I don't. No, I don't. But there is a question about a board rescinding the resolution establishing electronic voting. And I want to cover that because the answer is yes. A board could rescind that resolution, although I think all of us panelists will say we don't recommend it, but there is a possibility, although I've never seen that happen. The board could make a choice not to use electronic voting for a specific vote. And I've certainly had clients say, okay, well, that I think we can make it happen by paper ballot now. And so we're not going to use the GetQuorum or whatever electronic provider you have at this point, but we'll use it at another time. So that's what I usually see, not a rescission of the full resolution.
Thank you for clarifying that, Kyla, because we do get that question as an electronic voting provider as to, hey, listen, we don't want to use it for this voting matter. We may not use it this year at all. We might come back to you guys next year, knock on your door and kind of re-engage and use you for an electronic voting matter that we want. In many of those cases, and check in with your association counsel, you don't have to rescind, right, your electronic voting resolution. There is language in there that covers most of these associations stating that the board of directors, even though they turned on the switch for electronic voting, is not obligated to using it for every specific membership vote. The board of directors gets to decide when to use that electronic voting option and when to not use it without canceling out, right, that resolution that they've already gone through in that phase. I'll take it a step further. There's a lot of associations that say, hey, the language in there wasn't specific enough. We want to make sure we add some things. So I do encourage them to check in with their legal counsel and make an amendment, right? A simple amendment. You don't have to pass a brand new resolution. You do have the ability to amend your current resolution language, if I'm not mistaken, to make sure that it reflects maybe some of your procedures in your community as it relates to electronic voting, right?
Yep.
So awesome. We'll move things along here as well. Why use electronic voting? Well, hopefully by now, at this point of the presentation, you have a good understanding of many of the benefits of electronic voting. Massive increase in participation year one. To your point earlier, Jeff, year one looks like 80% for our communities. Excuse me. So 2,000 communities across the board, 80% year one, right? Those are the expectations that you can have out there. Massive reduction in printing and mailing costs. In the general, we've got over 70% of the communities that opt into electronic notices as well. Well, imagine getting your line item of printing and postage in your community budget and reducing that by 70%, right? And usually more year two and year three. That's huge as far as savings go, especially if you've got a large association, right? Maybe for a 40-unit association, not so much, but I know for our 3,000 unit, West Coast Bonita Springs Association, it was thousands of dollars of savings throughout the year. And our 5,000 unit Coconut Creek Association that we service, it was huge savings for them, right? And again, savings aside, much easier process, email right in the inbox for those owners. You can reduce some of this in-person burdens that you have, improve efficiency, and obviously enhance security. And yes, folks, there's a lot more reporting and auditability than you would have with a paper-based process. I saw some questions pop up. Do we want to hold those, Jeff, at this point to the end, or is it something that is substantial to this part of the presentation?
Well, it looks like it could be a fairly easy answer. I'm not sure who wants to take it, but it's, can the association use the association's website for notices?
I'll take that.
Tyler?
You can certainly post it on there, and there are some associations, condo associations with 150 units or more that are required to have a website and required to post these notices on the website. But can you substitute the requirement to send the for posting on the website? The answer is no.
No cheating the process, right? It's a courtesy, yes, a requirement for over 150, but you still have a requirement, and based on your association docs, to send these owners an official notice, especially if it is required for that meeting, right, Kyla? Now, of course, if they've opted into electronic notices, you're good to go. If they haven't, you still have a legal requirement for a paper notice to these owners.
Right.
The posting's additional. Virtual meetings. All right. Quickly here. Look, we're hopefully all familiar by now, right, with things such as Zoom, Cisco WebEx, like the one we're on today, Microsoft Teams, all wonderful platforms for electronic voting. And many of our associations, what we're finding is that they are leveraging this technology, even if it's just for their monthly board meetings. There's a sense of comfort around it. They do feel like they can get business done much quicker. I know I've been out of town in many occasions and logged into my monthly board meeting and participated as a board member in those and casted, and our motions. And certainly it's been very, very helpful and engaging. So they do come in different forms of fashion. So I just want to make sure we covered that. by just stating the word virtual meeting, especially in Florida, it's not granular enough. We've got to dive into what type of virtual meeting are you talking about? Why? Because in the state of Florida, still to this day, most associations are not allowed to have an only fully virtual meeting, especially as it pertains to annual meetings, right? You've got to have an in-person option for these meetings. So the fully virtual component for an annual meeting would usually not suffice for your requirements. Hybrid is what we're seeing a lot of. What does a hybrid meeting look like? Real simple, folks. It's what we're doing today. We're connecting on some sort of virtual level. And in addition to this, there would be an in-person option, right? There would be a room somewhere, boardroom or a larger, hotel ballroom if you're that size of an association that has some sort of projector, screen, and a microphone in that room, allowing owners that are sitting in person to see the screen, right? See some of those folks and the presentation up on the screen. And then inversely, for those that are on the Zoom meeting to see the room, right? So it's hybrid meeting. It has certainly been around for a while, but I think we're starting to use those a lot more than we've ever used them before, especially in our associations that have the option for that hybrid meeting component. Get with a provider that can assist you in hosting these hybrid meetings. If you are a large association, right, make sure that you get some help. Do not try to go at that alone and set up a $50 projector and and a camera somewhere and say, hey, we're good. We've got 3,000 folks showing up to this meeting. We're going to cover it. Please get it with an AV company. We've seen a lot of successful meetings run with the help of an AV company, ballroom, making sure you've got a good setup. And if you're a 20, 40 unit association and you have a hybrid meeting, great. You probably will get away with some sort of inexpensive projector, a TV screen somewhere, and a simple camera and a simple microphone in a laptop where both are communicating back and forth, right? Why hold these virtual meetings? For obvious reasons, increase owner participation, right? Improved accessibility, transparency, control over the audience, right? If you are having some sort of webinar style, you certainly have those muting capabilities. Shorter meeting times, believe it or not, they run much more efficient. And again, reporting and auditability, making sure that everything's auditable, and that we do have a way of showing who participated, virtually speaking. You can take meeting attendance, right? Let's consider some of the challenges. Look, I just mentioned some of the challenges, making sure that you've got the right equipment, right? But on an in-person side, I think we've covered some of those today, which is what is the attendee experience look like if you're going to have an in-person hybrid meeting? Make sure that you've communicated with your owners and letting them know we're offering a hybrid meeting option. You can log on, let's say with a Zoom, or you can attend in person. Here's what the rules of engagement are. Here's what it looks like, right? Here's what the experience will feel like. Here's what the process is going to be like. Our provider will be sending you a link, or we will be sending you a link if you want to opt, or the option to obviously log in. If you're going to show up in person, great. Here's what you can expect in person. There will be a camera recording everyone in the room, right? There will be microphones. Walk through that in some sort of communication and making sure they have a good understanding of the procedure for this annual meeting hybrid, for the voting procedures, whether they're opting into electronic voting or they're manually voting inside of that meeting as well. So make sure you walk through the meeting procedures, that you have a good understanding, and that you are communicating that. Of course, as with everything technological, make sure that you communicate. Otherwise, you will run into things like technical issues, obviously ballot tabulation errors, and meeting inefficiencies. You want to make sure that all those are covered, that you've had a dress rehearsal even beforehand as well. That is a little bit of a difference in your meeting procedures. Again, make sure as a board of directors you've covered what it's going to look like, right? And that you've walked through it. Make sure your manager has a very good understanding of what that hybrid meeting is going to look like, and make sure association council and even your voting provider, virtual meeting provider, is really, they're all on the same page is what we want, right? In terms of generally making sure that you're choosing the right vendor for these sort of solutions, make sure that that vendor can not only provide voting, but that they can track attendance in one of these annual meetings. They can provide a great attendee experience, and they can provide a sense of security, right? And that not everyone's allowed to log in. I know in the Zoom world, the verbiage is the following. Instead of a Zoom meeting where everyone is just giving a general link, general invitation to log in, what we're seeing more and more used is a Zoom webinar style, kind of like what we've got today, which is you've got to receive an individual invitation to this event. Otherwise, we cannot allow you to come in. What does that allow the vendor to do? That allows them to take virtual meeting attendance, and that allows them to control who's logging into this meeting, right? So again, it's an individual ticket. We can control who's coming in lieu of a generic link that can be passed on to a ton of owners. And I see Kyla shaking her head. You got anything to add for this one?
Yes, I've been part of many virtual meetings where, you know, owners might not have as much experience with the software, and you're coming in with iPhone 1, you know, screen 1 rather than names, and making sure that we can actually figure out who this person is, and you know, through no fault of their own, they're unable to find that part of the screen that they can go to change their name. Doesn't mean that they're not an owner and they are not supposed to be there. They are supposed to be there. We just don't know who you are. And it's tough to track if you're even supposed to be in there.
So to your point, Kyla, instead of iPhone 1 and all these Androids and artificial intelligence bots that you've got logging into the meetings, right? Folks, use a webinar style technology. I don't care which one it is, whichever one you find easiest. Use a webinar style technology for something like an annual meeting. If you're having a simple board meeting month to month, you might get away with the regular, obviously, you know, something like a Zoom meetings where not everyone send an individual link. However, for something so important like a special meeting or an annual meeting, try to use some sort of webinar technology where each owner and each member is being given their own unique link. What's that going to do? As soon as they log in, the system will recognize, number one, who it is that's there. Number two, it will eliminate that passing on of the generic link and you not knowing who it is that's logged in and identifying everybody. By the way, in 1,000 or 3,000 unit community, I can't imagine how challenging it is for a manager, right, to try to figure out who the 200 people are of iPhone 1 and 2 in that meeting, right?
I've been in one of those. It's horrible.
I can imagine. All right. So look, we'll push through some of this stuff to make sure that because we have already covered a ton of use cases, but best practices, again, kind of recap, right? All this stuff. Establish and follow some ground rules, right? Whether it's an electronic voting committee, which spoken to a ton of those, or whether it's the board of directors, really educating themselves on electronic voting and virtual meetings and what's a good fit for their community, right? My 20 unit condos versus my 5,000 unit HOA with nominations from the floor. Make sure that you're putting kind of in a paper your needs for your community, and that you then go out to a vendor, right, and say, these are our needs. Can you help us with virtual meetings? Can you help us with electronic votings, ballots, right? Please involve your legal counsel. Can't tell you how many times we've assisted folks, and then the day of the annual meeting, right, is the day that legal counsel is like, what are we doing? We're using this. What's going on? And all of a sudden, it's unfair to the Kylas of the world where they're like, wait, they didn't even tell me, right? They had established a lot of these procedures beforehand. They went under the radar. So please involve association counsel from the beginning of this process when you're drafting that resolution, when you're opting owners into electronic voting, electronic notices. Make sure those bases are covered and those check boxes are checked, because if you don't do it right, it will hijack the process, right? And choose a suitable platform and a vendor again. Just your meeting formats. Make sure that you hold a dress rehearsal before these virtual meetings, and make sure that you, even for the larger communities out there, have a town hall. I've been in many town halls and hosted many town halls with owners that say, hey, we're obviously now offering these services to our owners. They want to get an idea of what it's going to feel like and look like. Bring in your electronic voting provider vendors into a town hall meeting, hopefully virtually, so they don't have to all show up in person, right? Preparation is key in these. Looking ahead very quickly, and I think this is our last slide, right? So we can stick the landing. We see industry trending into electronic and digitization for these communities, right? This is a digital transformation. We've got communities that are 55 and better, like Century Village in Florida, right? In Deerfield Beach, at 82% opt-in, folks, right? So I always look back at that case study and say, if Century Village in Deerfield, right? Respectfully speaking, our 55 and better community is at 82% opt-in, and they're using these platforms. I think just about everybody else can come around and using them. So the technology is becoming easier and more user-friendly. We're using more of these associations. They're using technology to move these processes forward. And of course, our expectation is that there's a continuation of a digital transformation process for our associations in the state of Florida, allowing owners to vote and participate from anywhere in the world as long as they have internet access, right? They can really log into these meetings. So I'll pause there. I think we stuck the landing at least for the presentation, but I want to make sure that if there's anything as far as questions that are related for us, that I turn it back over to Jeff to kind of guide us on that.
Yeah, you nailed it, Frank. We've had a lot of great questions as we've gone through here. I'm going to ask you one that didn't come up in the chat, but it's something that I think of just as, anytime there's a transition or there's a change, and change can be a little difficult. If folks are looking to, I guess, work with yourself or work with another vendor and go this route, very similar to what we did, because it's been a little while since we've done a webinar. We did a practice session on Monday. I think you referenced this a couple of slides ago, but can you do like a beta test or a test run to help get folks on board? That way they know when they go live, everything's going to work properly. I'm sure that's a concern for some people.
Absolutely. Yeah. Do not engage with a vendor that will not allow for some sort of either dress rehearsal or practice beforehand. When that practice is held, is completely up to you and the vendor, right? It could be an hour before the session. It could be the day before, or like us, right? Today, obviously, being Monday, we connected, kind of on Friday. So, or on Monday, we connected for today. So we have connected beforehand. Make sure that you've got a practice session out there, that you're familiar with the software that you're using specifically, and that you've got a good understanding, especially as a board of director and as a manager for that community, and get some help. Do not go out at this all on your own out there. But yes, there should be some sort of practice session, especially for those larger meetings.
Yeah, that's excellent. I love that. Well, Kyla,
I see the cost popping up really quick, so I'm going to handle this one and then turn it over to Kyla. Please. I knew that was going to come up. So look, cost-wise, these systems range in costs, right? This is no different than any other service that can be provided in the state of Florida. The question is whether you want a self-service option for electronic voting and for virtual meetings, whereby your manager is handling and managing everything I've covered today, basically, right? That's electronic voting software is sold to the community, and they tell the manager, here's your 500-page manual, learn the electronic voting software, and then execute everything you just basically saw today in the presentation. Or whether you're looking for the other range of more of a full-service provider, such as the GetQuorums of the world, where you're like, hey, listen, our manager has enough going on. Please help them making sure that all these processes and procedures are established correctly, along with association counsel. In the general, especially for our associations, kind of, the 300-400 unit and up, what you're looking at is a cost of a few dollars per door for 12 months. So yearly costs is usually a few dollars, about the cost of a notice, an annual meeting notice, per unit for a 12-month use of these platforms, right? There's some additional costs, such as printing and mailing, if you wanted a provider to provide those specific ancillary fees. But generally speaking, much less expensive than you printing and providing your mailers and staying exactly with what you have right now.
Yeah, that's great information. Love that. Kyla, I'll let you, if you want to add any couple comments before I kind of take over the sign off from here.
Yeah, no, I don't really have much to comment about other than thank you for having me. This was a really great webinar, great presentation. I think we covered a lot of information and it was really fun.
Yeah, Frank, this was fantastic. I'll let you flip to the next slide just so everybody can see your information. So folks, for those of you who don't have Frank's information, that's how you get in touch with him. I think we had a really great conversation today. Look, this is sort of the stuff of the future, and I think it's going to benefit a lot of associations for going this way. A couple final housekeeping items that I'm going to give you before we sign off here. Just a reminder, if you are a CAM in attendance, and when we first set this up, we were hoping to collect your license number so we can get you your CEU credit. If you don't remember that being the case, email us, or I'll leave the chat open for a little bit longer. A few of you sent that over. Just double check that we have your CEU information. Frank will be uploading that, so you can email him directly, email me directly, or put it in the chat. Now from here, we're hoping to bring you some more webinars, so I might be in touch with some of you if you have any suggestions on interesting topics going forward. We've got a couple in the hopper and in mind where we're going to bring some interesting guest speakers in, but we'd love to hear from you and get a little bit of feedback, because the idea here is to give you a platform to share your ideas, share best practices, and hopefully give you an opportunity to manage your associations, better and going forward into the future. So again, thank you, everybody. A big thank you to Frank and for Kyla for taking some time and participating today. I think it was a great conversation. Thanks for all the attendees, and we'll look forward to seeing you soon. Happy holidays, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kyla.
Thank you.
Happy
Bye-bye.
holidays, guys. Merry Christmas. Ciao, ciao.
Take care.